All right, and welcome to the No Name Podcast, Ep.3, with your host Trey
and Braden. And today we have our first guest, John Montgomery.
Thanks for inviting me, guys. I'm honored to be here.
Yep, thank you for coming. A little introduction for John. He's a Christ follower, he's a husband, and he's a father. He's also a former Army Lieutenant Colonel in our U.S. military. He's a well-renowned real estate agent and investor here in Clarksville, founder of the JR Group, Ultra Runathon. Did I just say Ultra Runathon? Bro, I can't.
We're going to be doing a phone-a-thon after this.
I know.
Raising some money for the podcast.
Yes. All right. So, anyways, everything that Braden said, but I'll pick up on the ultra marathon runner since Braden was struggling to say it. And then one of the most disciplined humans that we know. He's a money organization master, and he's currently publishing a book on financial literacy expected to release this summer. We're glad to have you. And does it sound like we have the right bio here? I mean,
Yeah. Flattered to hear that introduction, and just happy to be here and look forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. Well, start off by telling us just a little bit about what you do in your everyday occupation. Well, actually, let's start by how we all met.
Yes.
Do that? Let's start by how we all met. And John, you're kind of we've mentioned you on the first two podcast episodes because obviously you were the one that introduced Braden and I, and then who would have thought now we're hosting a podcast. We showed up at a 5K and you were like, hey, you would enjoy this guy and you would enjoy this guy. And then now it's fast forward 3 or 4 months and now we're hosting a podcast together. We've become super good friends, and now we look to you as one of our mentors in all these awesome areas of life. So tell us a little bit about that, because I know that they're waiting to hear it, about that 5K, about what your relationship was with Braden and myself, and then kind of go into that a little bit.
Yeah, so I teach a leadership course at Austin Peay State University here in Clarksville in their President's Emerging Leaders program. I teach the sophomore class each fall semester, and Braden was a student in my class last year, and he stood out as someone who really showed a deep interest in the material we were covering, and someone who represented a lifelong learner. Yes, he's a young man, but I could already tell that this is someone who desired to know more and to push himself to learn as much as possible. So that's how Braden and I met. And then Trey, you and I met through social media in a way. You had reached out via Instagram based on a post I had made, I believe.
Yeah, so you had made a post that I absolutely fell in love with, and it kind of stuck with me. And then one day I decided to get off my butt and go run, and I was like, hey, I'm going to reach out to this guy who runs every day that I know is in the same real estate industry as me. But you had made a post that said, today is not over until tomorrow is set. And that had a lasting impact on me. And I just saw it on your story. And I was just friends with you because you were another real estate agent. And I saw that, and I think it's cool how it's kind of turned into I reached out. I was like, hey, I know you run. This made a lasting impact. And then you were like, hey, let's go run. And then lo and behold, didn't know what I was getting myself into running all those hills. But
well, and what collegiate football player reaches out to go running, right? So, it's been a cool journey since, getting to know both you guys, and excited for what the future holds for all of us, specifically you two with this endeavor.
Yeah, man, I remember going back to the beginning. I remember first class, I was like, this guy he's a doer. He is a man of his word, and I need to just come up with questions to just ask him after class, to just take up a little bit of this guy's time to pick his brain. So before class, I would come with questions prepared of just random things to ask you. just so I could get more of your time and just, start tapping into your sphere of influence. So greatly appreciative that you introduced me to Trey, and yeah, we're here today.
Yeah, and I think that was at the 5K. Is that correct? That I think it was the Valerie Hunter Kelly Memorial 5K that Austin P helped organize. And I think that's where the three of us met, if I'm not mistaken.
That's where we dominated Braden in a race.
Yeah, seriously.
No, yeah, that's where you introduced us. And I remember, like, right before the race, you had kind of come up and you had said, hey, this is Braden. He's a student in my class. And he's like, you guys would be really good friends. He has a lot of the same interests in you. And you had mentioned, well, first of all, you had talked about how he's a disciplined student. And then, you know, me being fresh out of college, you were like, I just want to connect you with this guy. And so that was an awesome connection. Very thankful for it. But I just want to second what Braden said and say thank you to you. Thank you for coming on here today to share a little bit about you and what you do. We're excited to get into it. We know that you hunt. You're a disciplined, motivated man. You real estate, like all the things, man. Jack of all trades, and you do it all well. And more importantly, Braden said it. You're a man of your word and dedication, right? And so that's what a lot of people in this world today are lacking a little bit, myself included for the longest. But that's what you two gentlemen have helped me to, you know, step into. Like, if you say it, you do it, and the confidence that comes with that. So let's start off with one of these questions just to get the conversation rolling. Why don't we?
You know, something I'd like to touch on. I think the greatest thing that I took away from your class is this parable about the theorist, the spectator, and the practitioner. And I think that you embody a practitioner, and that has really stuck with me. And I think that would be a great thing for you to just explain for the listener that doesn't know what that is.
Yeah, so that basically refers to kind of three types of people. So, you know, and I'm not the first to come up with this. Probably credit, you know, Goggins or someone like that. But basically, the theorist is someone who is perhaps well-read on a particular subject matter. You know, think academic. The spectator is someone who enjoys watching others do something, whether it be perform in a sport, theater, art, what have you. And a practitioner is someone who actually takes the field. And to me, it's important to embody all three components, but I always want to be someone who can take the field. And I ultimately know that Father Time will win, but I'm going to give him a good run for his money. And so that's why I take such good care of myself. That's why I am out there every day getting after it, because I always want to be a practitioner.
That's awesome. Were you always a practitioner?
I think so. I think I've always, you know, grown up as a kid, I was very involved in sports, you know, typical from the time I could throw a ball, catch a ball. You know, I'm from the last completely independent generation. I mean, I really believe that to be the case. We didn't have Life 360. We didn't have, you know, apps on our phones where our parents knew where we were. You know, we didn't stay underfoot of our parents. It was get home from school, go outside. In the summer, it was wake up, eat, go outside, come back at dark, right? Mm-hmm. And so gained a lot of independence that way, but we were always outside competing in one sport or another. And then after that, it was skateboarding. And then, you know, then it was falling in love with the outdoors through fishing, through bow hunting, then running, and, you know, everything else in between.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to tell you right now, I saw this man on Facebook the other day do a kickflip on a skateboard. I was highly impressed. Yeah, it was pretty impressive, but I really like I like what you touched on there with the completely independent generation. Your parents didn't GPS you?
No, we basically had to be within earshot of someone's parent, right? Now, that was, you know, might be on one day, but I remember as a very young kid, from probably 9 or 10 years old, I wanted to be a pro bass fisherman. That's what I wanted to do. I was obsessed with it. I still am. I'm passionate about bass fishing. And I was riding to local ponds by myself with my bike and a fishing rod when I was 10, 11 years old, maybe younger. I don't know, but my parents had no clue. Maybe they knew what pond I was at, maybe not.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a lot of trust earned by the kid, right? Not that I didn't get in trouble, not that I didn't push the boundaries, because we may get into that. Rules may or may not be made to break, but it was just different. So
the world has changed, seriously, and I feel like I wish I could have that type of upbringing. And there's so many young men whose lives and their upbringing are just going to be completely different than that of which your generation grew up in. And
yeah, great example. 15, 16 years old, hunting. When I was 15, my buddy Rob got his driver's license and we were hunting together. So this is a 15, 16-year-old with, whether we were bow hunting or gun hunting, we were by ourselves, out in the woods, 20-foot high up trees, deer hunting, or one of the places we hunted turkey was over 2 hours away. And that's what we did. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have check-in, check-out times. So we were just kind of on our own, but learned a lot and grew up a lot.
That's good. And I kind of grew up, I remember when I did have a flip phone, I wasn't always the smartphone iPhone generation. I had a flip phone, and I had one of those for communication, but also being an outdoorsman. I think that plays a lot into where I'm at today with the independency from my parents, because like you mentioned, I'm thankful that my parents let me okay, I'm going to hop on the John boat and go out on the middle of a lake. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And my parents trusted me enough because ultimately I think that carries over into where I'm at today and in the business that I'm about to start and kind of where I'm going in life. I think a lot of times if maybe you have that always over your shoulder, I think a lot of times maybe if that full on dependency is there, I think it could potentially, once you go out to enter into the world, it's just going to be a little bit harder to have to spread those wings. It's a little bit harder because you've never had any sort of, practice spreading your wings. And so I think that's cool how you had mentioned hunting, because that was big for me. And I'm very thankful my parents trusted me to go out into the woods with, a bow and arrow and climb up a tree and all that sort of stuff. And I always had the phone and had to text them when I'm here and there and all that good stuff. And so very, very thankful for that. But yeah, it is definitely, just from hearing you say that and even what my parents talk about, times have changed, different generations. And, there's a lot of other, I really don't know if there's any other risks associated, risks out there, risk factors. Maybe they've always been there, but is it just more out there because of the media, do you think?
That's what I believe. And I have this discussion all the time, right? I've got friends your ages. I've got friends in their 30s, 40s, friends in their 40s with young kids. And they're trying, my brother, for example, he's got a young son, trying to navigate these waters, right? I don't believe that a lot has changed with regards to, dangers, but our information has changed, the sharing of information. So it's in your face, right? Anything that happens that's, negative, right? Kid goes missing. everyone's iPhones are buzzing with an Amber Alert, right? So it's just much more prevalent now with regards to information sharing. So I think we have a heightened sense of awareness, but I don't believe that there's this massive influx of, negative activities potentially impacting our children.
Yeah, I think that's good. And, I think that's cool how you kind of, talked about that upbringing and everything. And what I want to touch on is you going into the military and like your disciplined mindset. Is the military something that was a product of your discipline, or is the discipline something that's a product of you going to the military? Or do you think, like, did you always want to go to the military? Or kind of, I know you said you wanted to be a bass fisherman, but kind of what led you to go the military route?
Yeah, so short answer, no, didn't always want to go to the military, but always felt a calling to serve. My grandfather served in the Navy. My father served in the Army. Neither retired, but they did serve. And so perhaps I had a desire to prove myself, and as a young man, that is a burden that many men feel. A lot of people don't want to talk about it, but it's a challenge as a young man to find your place, to realize your calling, and then to act upon that calling, whatever that may be. And so I went to college, jacked around in college. God bless my parents. For not giving up on me. They had every reason to do so. 6.5 years to earn a bachelor's degree in history. Still didn't know what I wanted to do with that degree. And so, but I felt a calling to serve. And really about my junior year of college, I started getting my act together. I mean, I was out of control, bottom line. And, selfish, wanted to do everything my way, and short-sighted. And I started getting my act together probably around the time I was 21, and made a decision to join the Army. I served as an Army officer, but I didn't start out that way. I enlisted in the Army for 4 years in the infantry. And that was what I thought I would do, is let me join the Army, serve my country, and during that time, either find my true calling or perhaps I stay in the military. But the quick version of a long story is that shortly into my enlistment, I became aware of officer candidate school and had some officers take me under their wing and kind of redirect me. And I ended up going to officer candidate school, earning my commission as a second lieutenant, and then went on to serve in the artillery. So that was kind of my entry into the Army. And did you ask about discipline and how that was related?
Is that where the discipline that you have now was forged, or was it like you said was it junior year of college? You said that you kind of started getting the act together, so to speak, and then was that like, okay, were you working out at that time, or were you, the things we talk about on this podcast being faith, fitness, finances, and framework being your mental aspects? Like, is that when those things started to come together and you started to kind of piece together I need to, figure out, maybe you've been a Christian your whole life and that just started growing, your finances, like when did, like, what was the catalyst maybe of those four that you started first? Did that start then? And then kind of where did that go from there? Because now you kind of seem to have a good framework in all four of them.
Yeah, it took time. So I would credit competitive archery to setting me on a path of self-discipline. And that started when I was 17. And that, I kind of combined my love of the outdoors and hunting, and then was introduced to competitive archery. And that required for me a lot of self-discipline, because obviously if you're going to be good at something, you've got to put in the hours. You two know that as athletes. And also through that experience, I surrounded myself with people who were generally older than me. And these were mostly guys in the trades. And I saw how they were earning a living, and I saw the work they put in, and I saw a work ethic that I started to look up to. And so I think that's where it started. But I was still wayward and not, fitness focused, certainly not faith focused at this point. But I do believe I possessed a great deal of self-discipline prior to going into the Army. I mean, these are the days of VHS tapes, and, we're, getting, Navy SEAL videos and watching workouts and things of that nature. Yeah. So, I was running and working out and really trying to be over-prepared for the unknown, right? Because at the time, so I entered the Army in 1997. So at the time, there weren't YouTube videos out on, day one of basic training or day one of Ranger School or something like that. Mm-hmm. So a lot of it was still in the unknown. So that, I would say, was kind of the path that led to the discipline that I kind of fostered during the military.
I think it's cool that along the way, in each step, you've had people that you look up to that act as mentors and guidance, who kind of take the path that you thought that you were going to do, kind of mold it and help guide you there. And I think that mentorship is such a vital thing that young men don't really understand the importance of, and just the concept of learning from someone that's done it ahead of you. I think that's amazing, and I know that that's something that you're really passionate about.
Yeah, and if you recall to the leadership class, it's basically you draw a circle and divide it up into 6 or 7 pie pieces, and each one representative of a part of your life, be it faith, finances, learning, fitness, family, etc. And then within each of those pieces of pie, you have several goals. And also, I would recommend finding a mentor. Who is your spiritual advisor? Who is your fitness coach? Who is your business coach? If Tiger Woods has a coach, I need a coach. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of how I broke that down, and that's been a template, if you will, that I always reflect upon. One, to make sure that there's harmony across my life, that I have goals spread across my life, and that I have someone I'm looking up to and learning from in every component of life.
I think that's phenomenal. And one thing I want to say to the mentorship, because I didn't take your class, and so but now that you mentioned that, like, I set my goals the exact same way, because Braden showed me how you set goals. I had a different way of setting goals before, but of course, if me and Braden are going to be best buds, we got to set goals the same exact way, right? Yeah. So, anyways, where I was going with that is set the goals for each area of life, and then have a mentor for each area of life that is important to you, and that can look different for everybody. But the mentorship, I think one of the things that's important to note is when you step into being mentored by someone, and this is one thing that one of my mentors told me one time. He straight up looked at me and he was like, "Hey, I want to be your mentor, but also, like, I'm not going to pursue you." And he told me that. Like, he told me that to my face. I'm like, man, this is someone I want to learn from. And he was like, but I'm busy and I'm doing these things every day, and I'm going to show up every day. And he's like, so if you want to be mentored, then just show up, is kind of what he told me. And I was like, okay, wow. And then he didn't really, like, Like, he expected me to message him and say, hey, can I tag along today? Can I do this? You did that when I was going through an awesome running phase. You were like, I remember one time I woke up and I'm like, hey, I don't know if I'm going to make it. And you're like, okay, sounds good.
Yep.
And I'm like, okay, he just told me, like, I'm going to be there. Like, whether you show up or not, like, I'm going to be in the same spot every single day. And so I think that's important for anyone listening who might be, like, in a position, a young man, young woman that's in a position of wanting to find a mentor in an area. Don't be afraid to pursue a mentor. Like, if they find that you're a nuisance, like, hopefully they would be able to stand up, stick their chest out and say, but I don't think anyone's going to do that. And you can't be fearful of that. And don't be afraid to reach out to them and say, can I keep coming back for more? And I think that's super important. That's even one thing when we became friends in real estate that I mentioned to you. I was like, I'm doing this every day. And so just show up and then learn.
Yeah, you just have to take initiative. And seriously, a lot of me joining the team has to be with just because I kept showing up and I kept like budging my way into being a part of the team. And I think that's what you have to do sometimes. If people aren't naturally, surrounded with your life that are, these successful people, you have to go make your life a part of theirs and find a way to add value to them so that you can get that value back in return.
Yeah. I think most people who find success in any area of life will gladly share the secrets to that success. They want to share. They want to hand the torch to someone. What good is information not shared? I don't want to take anything I know that's helped me to the grave without sharing it. And so when someone approaches me who is obviously expressing a desire to learn, that's huge. And you love seeing that. I love seeing that. So yeah, I would encourage anyone listening to, seek out mentors. That's one of the assignments in the class, right? I mean, seek out a mentor and reflect on it. Reflect on the experience and then share the experience with the class. And it's a way to try to encourage young men and women to really explore that avenue because there's so much goodness there.
There is, most definitely. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I love something you said, like, what good is information if you take it to the grave? Because one thing that I think a lot of us hear oftentimes in today's world, we hear a lot of times, like, you can't take your money to the grave. You can't take your money to the grave. And that's amazing. But at the same time, like, how much more valuable is information than money? And I had to really break a mindset of this because now it's funny now helping others with financial organization and budgeting. I've always been that way, but also not in the most healthy way. Some of it's been kind of like, I want to control this. I want more of this. But I love what you just said because I always hear you can't take money to the grave, but how much more valuable is information? Because if you took your money to the grave, what's someone going to do? They're going to come dig it right up and be like, hey, I know he put a lot of money down in that grave. But the information, you take that to the grave, that's there. You didn't pass it along. You can't dig it back up. You can't wake you back up and be like, what is the one thing you didn't tell me? And so sharing that with your loved ones and everybody, it just shows how valuable, having a mentor and a mentee and sharing that information and passing the torch. I love what you said. Yeah,
Jim Rohn, he's dead, but obviously you can check him out. He's very, very wise. But he said 3 of the most valuable things you can leave behind: your photographs, your library, and your journals. And there's a lot of wisdom in that statement, especially when you think of the journals. And oftentimes the journals are the compilation of information extracted from the photographs, extracted from your library. And why not learn from someone who's made those mistakes, right? Instead of learning things the hard way. So I've always thought that was very wise.
Yeah, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You just have to go find someone that's already done it and just copy and paste and do that exact same thing. That's something that Trey and I, with what we're trying to pursue in business right now, we've come to realize that these people that are doing it, they're no more qualified than any of us are. Like, we're all of the same caliber, but they just took action. What's the one quote that you like to say? No.
All action, no hesitation, baby.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you're obviously a mentor to both Trey and I in the realm of real estate, but you weren't always in real estate. How did you transition from the military then to being in real estate?
So a friend of mine in the military was involved in real estate investing. I knew very little about it, but it interested me. I've had an entrepreneurial heart for some time. I've started investing when I was probably 20, not in real estate, just in the market. And that really piqued my interest. And then I had a friend here locally who was an investor. I didn't realize how successful of an investor he was at the time, but those two took me under their wing, and I dove into it head first and really started researching everything I could about real estate investing, because it seemed to me a more tangible asset than stocks, mutual funds, etc. So while on active duty, we purchased our first rental property, and then another. And several years later, as I was looking to retire from the Army and was thinking about what to do in Chapter 2 of my professional life, I had another mentor in the real estate space. She was a very successful realtor. She is my mom's best friend. And so I began seeking her advice as to what potential she saw for me in the real estate space.
You began seeking her advice. She didn't say, "Oh, there's John, I'm going to go seek his." Goes back to the mentorship. You have to pursue a mentor.
Right. And, she's been the president of our local association. She owned a brokerage. She very successful, trained countless agents here in Clarksville, to include my principal broker now. And based on what I learned from my mentors in the real estate investment arena and what I learned from her in the real estate agent arena, if you will, I thought that my knowledge of both would serve me well. And it was a leap of faith, because I was leaving while not necessarily stable career, a secure career from the point of, income, right? I mean, in the military, you're going to get a check. Whereas in real estate, we're 100% commission. So it was quite a leap of faith, but without those mentors, would not have happened. I would have probably served in the defense industry in some capacity, which would have suited my skill set at the time, but I haven't looked back.
I have to think that this is where finances starts to come into play, because now you're talking about investing. You're talking about going from a career that is secure and, correct me if I'm wrong, but relatively same pay or consistent pay that's going to, provide, now into an industry that's like, you could make $0 this month. You could make $10,000 this month, whatever it might be. So obviously now you're getting into the world of, we've got to have some financial structure and planning. And one thing that I always say that I just want to reiterate is, a lot of people want to get into real estate investing. But if you can't handle your own personal finances, then how do you think that you're going to be able to purchase house after house after house and purchase it without driving yourself into the ground? So I know that personal budgeting and personal finance is like huge for all of us. In particular, I love coaching people on it. I nerd out over the budget, and I know you do too. You're even writing a book on it. That's another area that we connected on. I'm like, yeah, I'm a budget nerd, and you're like, oh, me too. High five, you know. And so, tell me a little bit about the financial, like when it comes to finances, like when did that start did that come along as you transitioned from the military? Were you already kind of budgeting in the military, and kind of like where are you at in the financial world of things right now, and what's your book about?
So multiple questions. I'll see if I can remember them. My interest in financial literacy has always been there to some degree, but definitely became elevated prior to beginning my journey in real estate investing, because I knew I needed significant reserves. I needed to be able to have a personal financial statement that would allow a lender to look favorably on me and my plan for acquiring any given property. So I needed to get my financial house in order. And since purchasing our first property, I've just doubled down on that and become much more passionate about financial literacy. And there's a strong relationship between financial independence and self-discipline. And we can probably or hopefully talk more about the self-discipline component of it, but they do go hand in hand. And so I appreciated that. And ever since, I've been trying to, practice what I preach, which is not easy, right? It's not complex, but it's hard. And so I've tried to practice what I preach, and I try to look at finances as something that allow me to, do more good. Money's not bad. What you do with it or your relationship with it can be bad, but in and of itself, it's not bad. And there is a correlation, I argue, between financial freedom and personal freedom, right? We live on an economic planet. If I don't have the money for a car, I'm going to be outside waiting in the rain at the bus stop. That's just the fact of life. And so it's just something I've become passionate about, and that's why I'm writing a book about it.
That's awesome. Now, when is your book going to be published?
So I'm hoping this summer. So it's in for line editing now. Once complete, we'll go back and look at how it will be laid out, which it's basically complete in my mind, but now I'm turning it over to the editors, turning it over to the creatives to package it into, a finished product. And that's been a labor of love. A lot of people have helped with it. And I'm really excited about being able to kind of bring it out and share it with people. And the whole premise of the book was to make an easily digestible primer, if you will, a book, the way I designed it so that every page is a standalone page, whether it's a quote, whether it's a paragraph that contains some nugget of financial wisdom. But my target audience was basically think high school, junior, senior, graduate, all the way up into any age that's trying to get their financial house in order. And so there's a lot of books out there on financial literacy, but I tried to create a book that was simple, accessible, and very practical. Just like in the class, I talk about providing leadership tools that you can immediately put into action. And that was the goal of this book.
I want to touch on, like you said, all the way from like high school and up, because that's one thing I started to budget when I was young. And people, like, oh, how did you budget when you were that young? What expenses did you have? And I just want to say that, like, you can never start budgeting too early, even if you have one source of income as an allowance and one expense as gas, because the first step to getting your finances in order is figure out what's coming in and what's going out. And naturally, as we progress through life, hopefully the income goes up, and then also the expenses go up. And so now your first step is to gather all that. And so if you start gathering that information, like the later you get, naturally the more you're going to have to dig and probably set aside a whole day or a whole week, or like depends on how much you want to dive into it. But you're going to have to comb through the bank statements. You're going to have to like go through all this stuff and figure out what's going out and what's coming in. Let's make sure that what's going out is less than what's coming in. And then you start doing that. But if you start here, then it's like, okay, we've got allowance from mom, or I wait tables, and let's track that. And then I have one expense, which is gas. And now all you're doing is adding. Like once you pick up another expense, you're like, oh, picked up an expense. Now I'm paying for my own groceries. Let's add that there. Oh, now I got another side hustle job. Let's add that on there. And now you're just adding one thing at a time as you go throughout life, rather than backtracking and trying to like gather all this information. So I just want to say it's never too early to start, like, period.
No doubt, that is good. And I feel like there's so much both in finances and in just mental discipline, like you were correlating the two, of setting something aside now for a greater good later. And that applies with our health. That applies with what we do with our bodies, our temple now for something greater later. Just like that same muscle, it's hard to do that. It's hard to do that with your finances as well. But do you want to talk about the correlation between those two?
Yeah, I think it just goes back to discipline. And discipline is one of our greatest friends. And it helps you take care of yourself, take care of your family, take care of your friends, achieve your goals. And most of what we're discussing today, this is not PhD level life, but it's extremely hard. You all, as athletes, as college students, college graduate, you know the work required to achieve different goals. And it's not easy. And you don't always want to get up and, as I say, grab the oar and row. But that's ultimately what sets the successful apart in many instances, is the degree to which they execute self-discipline day in, day out.
Now, how does someone build discipline from the ground up? Because a lot of people will start with motivation, and as soon as motivation runs out, then whatever their goal is stops. It stops happening. They stop taking steps towards that.
Well, if you're unfamiliar with discipline in general, right, there are a number of influencers, if you will, that embody self-discipline, be it a David Goggins, be it a Jocko Willink, be it a Cameron Haynes. There are people in that space who you can look up to, who I look up to, and who I model my discipline after. And every day is a new test. And that's why I love the challenge of a new day. And it starts with the alarm clock. Who's going to win? Who's going to win? And for many, many people, the alarm clock wins. My alarm clock doesn't win very often.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I love how you said every day is a new day, because this isn't something that gets easier as it goes on. Discipline, that muscle, it's a perishable skill. And if you're not, conquering it daily, first thing in the morning, the alarm clock, then it's so easy to just fall back into, a snowball of losses. Or you can, build up that discipline muscle at the beginning of every day and win at the beginning of every day and stack those wins.
You hit the nail on the head. It doesn't get easier. It gets harder, because the more successful you become, the easier it is to fall into that trap of believing that you've arrived. I don't need to go run. I don't need to be able to do pull-ups, be able to do push-ups. I just can, whatever. I don't need to budget. I don't need to read. I don't need to learn. I'm here. I've made it. That's an easy trap to fall into. And I'm not saying I've made it. I'm simply using that as an example. So I think the more successful you become, the more difficult it is to continue to exercise self-discipline on a daily basis, because you'll find that many people in your space aren't doing that. And then you become more or less an outlier. Like, what are you trying to prove? Why are you doing this? Are you better than me, etc.? So you'll run into that.
I just want to say too, I think a lot of times when it comes to the motivation coming first, and then you try to start having discipline, you get 2 weeks in, and then that's when, the first week you're good, you're still running on motivation. Second week you're still like, okay, this is fun. And then I just want to encourage everybody, because I'm going through this right now and will forever be going through it. The grass is greener on the other side of the 2 weeks. And not only that, but it keeps getting greener, but it also keeps getting harder. Like you were saying, it keeps getting harder, but you are literally building self-confidence with every single thing that you do, every single one thing that you do. You're building self-confidence. And not only that, but your family see it. Your friends see it. You yourself see it. Your kids see it. And ultimately, you exude more love, ultimately, when you are confident in who you are as a human. And so, again, for us, we on this podcast, we talk about faith, finances, fitness, and framework. But this could be with anything. So just know that once you get past the 2 weeks, I don't know if there's a trick. A lot of people talk about what can you do, what are the tricks, but I don't know if there is.
Well, and as a man, I think it makes you more dependable in the eyes of those you love and who look to you. When you've got a wife that knows you're going to wake up when the alarm goes off, you're going to go to work and give it 100%. You're going to be there in times of trial. Self-discipline helps foster that. And I think helps make you a more dependable spouse, father, friend. So there's a multitude of benefits.
I love that. Builds trust, especially with the spouse, because I've seen that in my marriage, just of having this. I'm working on this discipline muscle every single day. In the area of discipline, I have a lot to learn from you guys, and so I'm working on this every single day, but I can say the trust level with your spouse, if what you said about the alarm clock, your spouse can have two different perspectives of this alarm clock. It's like, okay, he just wakes me up every day at 5:30 to go back to bed. Or, okay, he wakes me up every day and he does what he says he's going to do. Therefore, the next time I ask him to do something, I know he's going to follow through with it and not go back to sleep, you know. And I think that's such a cool thing that you mentioned. I remember we've talked about that in the past. But I know we're running out of time here. We've only got a few more minutes. We want to try to keep it under an hour. But running is also a huge part of what you do. Every morning, I actually pass you on the way to the gym many times. As you're running up and down the street on the main road over there, I'll be going and I'll see you with your headlamp on. And I'm like, hey, there's John.
There's John running up and down Madison Street.
Yeah, as I'm coming downtown to go to the gym, I'll pass him. But that's a huge part of what you do. And you've actually ran ultra marathons, correct? And you've actually kind of come up with your own ultra marathons over at Land Between the Lakes, which is cool. So where did this passion for running come from? And it's like, what role does that play in your everyday life? Like, how does that set the tone?
Yeah, and also highlight, I think that it's not to be understated what you've done in running. You're an ultra marathon runner, so please highlight your greatest achievements in running thus far and what you still have left in the tank on your bucket list.
Yeah, so I run primarily for the mental aspect of running, and it's a time to allow me to gather my thoughts, but it's also a very tangible way to keep me accountable. Not only am I setting an alarm clock, let's say 4 a.m., but there's on most days a mileage attached to that. So I know that, let's say I've got a 12-mile run. So when the alarm goes off, it's 4 a.m., it's 4:30 a.m., I'm getting up. Not only am I getting up, I'm going to go do 12 miles. And so it's everything involved in that. That's the preparation the night before to run 12 miles. That's having my kit together to run 12 miles. That's having the plan together. That's considering my fuel for the day, my recovery, et cetera, et cetera. But there's so many mental components of that, as opposed to, I'm not just waking up at 4:30 to wake up, right? So I've got a plan, and that keeps me accountable to myself. And no one knows but me the plan. That's why I love it, because
and me when I see you.
That's right. But even if you see me in the morning, you don't know how far I told myself I was going to run. And so to me, it's one thing to tell someone else, hey, Trey, we're going to run 10 miles together. You show up at my house and we go run 10 miles. It's another thing to get a bad night's sleep for whatever reason, but you told yourself you were going to run 10 miles. There's no one showing up to encourage you, but to then go run that 10 miles and complete it on time to the standard you set. No one knows, no one cares, but you do. And to me, that's a win. So if I can store up those wins, that helps with my confidence, and it puts me on a glide path for the rest of the day, the week, etc. So with reference to greatest accomplishment in running, it's probably I did a 50-miler trail run up at Land Between the Lakes, and I had only signed up to do a marathon, but it was one of these events where it was like you could run a marathon, you could do like 50K, 50 miles, and I ended up running alongside a student from University of Kentucky, and ultimately it was a loop course, and he ultimately ended a bit earlier than he'd wanted to, but at that point I'd already ran longer than I'd signed up for, and I thought, well, let's just keep going. And so that was my first 50-miler. So that was pretty cool. And as far as what's left, I hope a lot. I try to take care of myself. I lift a lot. I do a lot of yoga, and I run. And I hope that I can stay healthy enough to continue.
Yeah, that's so cool. And whether that's, not everyone's going to be a runner. Whether it's running, whether it's, lifting weights, whatever you do, I think that it's so crucial to just have some type of physical thing that you do to just conquer your flesh and to get over that and get that win. There's so much parallel between the physical and the spiritual, and just how the physical and the mental, how it all comes together full picture. Now, you said that was your first 50-mile race. Are you saying that you've done multiple 50-milers thus far?
Yeah, so last year that was in March, and then I did a 50-miler up in Indy in June. That was, like a road race. And I've done some 50Ks, but so who knows what's next. I always want to be able to physically do what I'm passionate about. My true passion is bow hunting. Bow hunting and bass fishing, and I just love being able to get outside. And so whatever I can do to stay healthy and do that, I'll continue doing it. So for sure.
That's awesome.
Well, one thing I want to close with kind of before we be thinking of your quote, because we love giving a quote before we end off. But one thing I want to point out is this, that all these areas that we've talked about, for you, it's hunting and fishing and, working out or running and staying disciplined in your finances and, all those areas we're discussing. Mentorship, menteeship. I think it's so important to recognize too that all of these things are to create a certain life that we want. These aren't our life, but this is how we as men can show up for our families, which is what truly matters.
Yeah, these aren't our life. My purpose in life: love God, love people, do good. And that's my purpose. And my faith is a huge component of my life. Maybe that's for another podcast, but what we're talking about are different elements of life. But it goes back to creating harmony throughout your life, and how are these different components interconnected? How do they support one another? Ultimately, I think they will, but we don't want to, go down one rabbit hole too deep to where we're losing sight of what's really important or another critical area of life. So, keeping that balance, keeping that harmony, is critical. But also understanding what's really important. Like running is not important. Bow hunting is not important. Being a follower of Christ, being a husband, a father, and a friend, and a mentor, those are the things that are critical in life. Finances, fitness, those are subcomponents that I think help me do better in the components that truly make a difference.
That's good. I think that's good to end on. I couldn't have said it better myself. The priority stack, having, Christ at the headship of everything you do, and then start stacking your priorities down from there. And as long as we've got that, then I think we'll all do all right. So give us a quote, John, and then we'll end it on that. Did you come prepared?
We all have excuses, but they rarely help us achieve our goals.
On that note,